So I want to conclude the session this week by, in Screencast 6, looking a bit more widely at some global evidence. So, as I said earlier, I'm acutely aware that, this cohort of students, as is always the case on the Masters programme, has students from a wide variety of countries around the world. And as we look at the USA and Europe, that kind of ignores, and we also look at Japan, but that ignores the experience of workers and people in countries that many of our students actually come from. So I've tried to look at some additional data sources to try to pick up on some other sources of information. It's not possible to do it for all countries that everybody in the class is from, because the data isn't just available, but this just tries to give a bit of a wider international picture. But we'll start off by just considering Europe, because we've looked at Britain, but we haven't really considered Europe very much. Now, Western Europe, and we can exclude the UK from this, I think, but most countries in Western Europe, and when I say Western Europe, I'm probably excluding, countries that were in the kind of formerly in Eastern Europe, so Warsaw Pact countries. I'm probably excluding Greece as well. Turkey is included in some figures as being within Europe. That's more of an Asian market. We'll talk about that in a bit. But if we think about most of Western Europe, productivity increases there in stark contrast with what Juliet B. Shaw describes as going on in North America. Productivity increases have been accompanied by increased leisure time. And this means that in Europe, leisure and leisure time is treated as a normal good, which means that consumers will increase their demand for leisure or any good as their income increases. Now, in the US, we could say that leisure time is being seen as an inferior good, in that as incomes increase, demand for it decreases. Okay. And Western Europe, i.e. the European Union, has more leisure time than anywhere else in the world, as measured by standard labour market indicators, the things we've looked at, which are average weekly working hours and holiday entitlement. So this map is taken from Penn World Tables. So Penn World Tables is a publication. Unfortunately, it's not available on Hallam's website, through Hallam Library Gateway, but it is a publication which maps and compares data, economic data, for countries around the world. Now you can see that first of all, what we talked about in terms of lack of data availability. So for Africa, there are many countries for which Penn World Tables don't have access to data. And this also goes into kind of Asia, the Gulf states around here, and then up into kind of, up through into kind of some of the southern kind of former Soviet states here in Mongolia. But what we do have is, Mongolia. What we do have is some data for China, some data for India, and it gives us a bit more of a picture. We can see that for Africa, there's just, I believe that's Nigeria and South Africa for data. But what this shows us is some of what we've said about already, that Western Europe has some of the lowest hours. So it is made up of these two lightest colours. Okay, so we can see Britain, France, Spain, Italy, Switzerland, coloured Sweden, coloured in these kind of mid-orange colours. What we can see interestingly here, for example, is Germany, Denmark, and Norway having substantially lower levels of average annual working hours. And on most sets of data that you look at, Denmark actually enjoys the lowest working hours and some of the highest leisure hours. in the world. We see, in the Americas, we can see that the US has some of the highest working hours, and that we've got a bit of a mixed picture in South America. So, for example, Chile has still got fairly high working hours. Other things we can see is that, in the Far East or in Southeast Asia, we've got, and China has, fairly high working hours, and that India also has fairly high working hours. Okay, so there is some evidence here, and we can see that even some countries in Europe, so here's Greece, and I think that's probably Poland there, but I couldn't swear to that. My geography at the map at this size is not that great. And Portugal, to a degree, have some higher working hours, but there is very much a kind of east-west split here, in that, China, India, and some of the Southeast Asian countries and the Southern Asian countries actually have far higher working hours. But what we can see here is that Europe, and some countries in Europe in particular, have very low levels of hours of work. This is another source of information to try to pick up some information on countries. Now, this is from Gapminder, and I know that Mark Taylor, on the work he's doing with you on the external environment, on international sports strategy, has talked to you about Gapminder data. So this is drawn from a number of official government sources of information. I thought I would show you this, but there are some things in this which make me wonder about the reliability of some of this data. So this year on the master's course, we've got a student from Ghana. So I thought it'd be worth putting in the figures for Ghana. But what we can see is there's a lot of variation in the hours here, and a particularly steep drop here. So this makes me wonder if there's been some particular thing which happened in Ghana which I'm not aware of, or more likely, if the figures themselves, there's some underlying methodological problem, which means that they're less reliable than they might be. We've also got a student from Argentina this particular year as well, and so I thought I'd put Argentina in, but as you can see, there's a lot of kind of variation in the last couple of years for Argentina, which makes me wonder how reliable some of these figures are. But nevertheless, this does kind of give us a bit of a pattern which was replicated on the previous world map, which is that the countries in yellow are Europe and Northern Asia, so Eurasia, which includes Russia. And what we can see here is that if we look at Denmark and the United Kingdom, they're at the bottom of the chart. Okay, Turkey, which is kind of not yet a member of the EU, but which is kind of, has aspirations to join the EU and become increasingly European, that has very high working hours. But you also have a substantial number of students from China, usually on the course. We can see that China's working hours averaging around about 45, 46 hours. Thailand slightly lower, but still at 44, and Singapore well above what we would see in Europe, and Japan here, amongst the other kind of Asian countries, is in the high 30s and has seen, according to Gapminder data, a decrease. But this shows us the variation, and the fact that what it shows us that North America, or the Americas, are kind of a medium hours of work continent, if you like. It shows us that Western Europe is the lowest. It shows us that Asia, Southern Asia and Southeast Asia have some of the highest working hours. And it also shows that there's a lack of data for Africa and what's going on in Africa, and that there isn't reliable, robust information for us to form an opinion of what's going on there, I don't think, based on this evidence anyway. In Europe as well, so we talked about Europe, and I said that Denmark enjoyed or had some of the lowest working hours in Europe, and this is from Eurostat. which is an EU data source database, and this shows us that Denmark at 38.4 hours is the lowest in Europe. The European average is 40.9. So some of these figures are actually slightly higher than we've looked at in other sources. But again, it shows us that the United Kingdom is second highest in Europe after Greece. Some international comparisons of annual leave entitlement. So what we see here, and I've shown you this once before, is that the US and Mexico and Canada, i.e. so some representation there from North America and Central America, have some of the lowest holidays. And what we can see is, Western European countries here have among the highest levels of holidays, yeah, and we've got some representation there from South America there in the form of Chile, which has reasonably high. But what we can see again is this picture of the Americas being at the bottom of the league table here, and Europe being at the kind of top of the league table. So there's quite a differentiation there. And that again reflects on what we've said about leisure being a normal good in Europe. As incomes rise, people demand more leisure time, take the productivity dividend and convert that into leisure. And in the Americas, particularly the USA and Canada, there's some evidence that, as incomes have risen, people have taken the productivity dividend and decided to work more hours to buy more stuff at the expense of leisure time. So, what are some conclusions then? Well, I think we can conclude that it's far from clear that economist predictions which were made in the early and mid part of the 20th century, that leisure time would increase and work time would decrease. The evidence in many countries shows that that's just not happened. And as the price of leisure increases, workers in some countries appear to be choosing work over leisure time. So we could say this in the USA. And some countries in Southeast Asia, although, it's difficult to look at the long-term patterns of work in Southeast Asia because we don't have the data, but there is some suggestion that the substitution effect is stronger. However, in other countries, mainly in Europe, there's still some evidence of an income effect, and that leisure is a normal good. As incomes rise, demand for leisure actually increases. And the UK, it has to be said, is somewhere between the two. It's kind of, there's more demand for leisure time than in the US, but equally not as much demand for leisure time as in Europe. So we're kind of a halfway house, this kind of mid-Atlantic position that the UK has. And I think it is fair to actually conclude that time scarcity does appear to be a bigger constraint on consumers' demand for sport than scarcity of income. Yeah. Because of the kind of intricacies of the income and the substitution effect, which we might discuss more when we come to the seminar this week. So, in the seminar this week, we're going to try and consider and discuss, for countries which display a stronger substitution effect, what's going on here, and what types of sports, goods and services might we expect to see dominate here, what's going on in these countries. Yeah, so we might talk about how you might expect the leisure market in North America to be different than, for example, the leisure market for countries in Western Europe, where countries display stronger income effect, whereas incomes increase, demand for leisure time increases, so there's more leisure time. So what type of sports, goods, services might we expect to see there? And as managers in the industry, how would you expect to see the sport market responding to some of these issues, and also to issues associated with the time dating issue, which is caused by the constraints that work time puts around people's ability to take part in leisure. Okay, so that's the end of all the screencasts for this week, and we'll pick up and discuss some of these issues in the seminars this week.